Yeah, there are two areas where Italy really scores massively below the European average. The first is in fiscal discipline, the question of tax rates, government spending. Italian policies are really out of line with those of other European countries. The Italian government spends at a rate of almost 50% of your gross domestic product. That's a huge diversion of resources out of the private sector and into the public trough, if you will, the public spending of government. The other area where Italy lags behind is in the area of rule of law and corruption. Here scores are closer to 15 points lower than the European average, and that is one of the most fundamental underpinnings of economic freedom and prosperity. When people don't trust the government or trust the actions of other individuals, it's very hard to invest and increase productivity. I think that really holds back the Italian development.
Do you think there is a link between the overwhelming regulation by states and corruption?
Absolutely. We see this on a worldwide basis, not just in Italy. The larger government is, as a proportion of gross domestic product, the much greater corruption tends to be. And I think it's just obvious, if you think about it, that the more money that's being moved through political channels and decided by political decisions rather than economic decisions, the more opportunities there are for corruption, graft, bribery. And we see that in all cases where government is operating with a very large part of economic activity. Well, we've seen mixed responses around the world. Many countries have continued to increase their economic freedom. They've continued their openness to the rest of the world. They've continued trade liberalization. I'm very encouraged by the fact that many countries have really stayed on the path of economic freedom. There are other countries, however, that are dropping off of that path, and that's a great concern. I mentioned the United States before. It had the largest drop of any of the 20 largest countries of economic freedom. The United Kingdom had a large drop in economic freedom this year, dropping out of the top 10 in our index for the first time ever. The United States is such a large portion of world economic activity. It's one of the main consumers, importers of goods and services from around the world. And when the United States doesn't prosper, it's very hard for the rest of the world to prosper, given the way our economies are linked together. So if I were a citizen of the world, which of course I am, I would be very concerned, no matter where I lived, about developments in the United States, because the United States right now has chaotic government policies. We're not investing in the United States. We're building a huge government deficit. We're not creating jobs. And we're not importing at the level we have been importing in the past. And that's going to hurt worldwide recovery. I think we're much more likely to recover if the state will stay out of the markets. What caused this crisis in the first place were interventions in the economy by the government, particularly in the United States. You had financial interventions in our mortgage market. You created a big housing bubble in the United States, an unsustainable bubble that eventually burst. That hurt credit markets. Financial firms were under risk in the United States. And all this meant that you weren't getting market prices in the economy. If you leave the economy alone, goods and services are priced according to demand and supply. And that tends to be a very stable sort of process. People can have a lot of confidence when the market is setting the prices about what conditions will be in the future. When the government intervenes, by contrast, you get uncertainty in the market. When politicians are making economic decisions, they may not be doing it based on productivity or what's best for economic growth. They may be doing it to satisfy a particular political constituency. They may be doing it to try to increase their chances of getting reelected to office in a democracy. There are many things that interfere, and it's very hard to know what the actual price of a good or a service or even the right price for credit in an economy like that. The market does a much better job of allocating resources and setting real prices. When you have real prices, you have certainty in the market, and then you can have investment, and it's investment that creates jobs. Yeah, the U.S. has had a terrible drop in economic freedom. Our government has intervened in financial markets. We've taken over some institutions. We've nationalized some institutions. We've partially nationalized some of our auto companies. We've interfered in the bankruptcy process, and the property rights of investors were just completely ignored in the process of our automotive restructuring. We've had massive government increase spending, so-called fiscal stimulus that hasn't really produced any job growth whatsoever, but has added to the government deficit. We're creating a situation in which Americans will be in debt for the foreseeable future because of these spending increases. We're going to have to either raise taxes or have the government borrow more money in credit markets. That could lead to an increase in interest rates. We could see higher inflation. In one way or the other, you have to pay for all this government spending. Government spending is never free. The resources that government spends come from somewhere. They come from the people, ultimately. And economic activity is far more efficient when you let the people decide how to spend their resources than when you take the money away from them and have someone in the government decide for everybody how to spend the money. The U.S. right now, it's a very uncertain situation. I think the policies followed by President Obama have been very bad. They've increased the length of the recession. I think they've hurt the job market in the United States. They're holding unemployment at very high levels. Our unemployment rate's about 10% in the United States right now. We really need to get the government out of the way in the United States, and then I think the banks will start lending, firms will start borrowing and investing, we'll have new job creation, and you'll see the American economy really pick up. But for that to happen, you're going to have to see the government step back and avoid the kind of interventionist policies that we've seen over the past year or even a little longer.